Good evening and welcome. Tonight, we invite you to step quietly into the world of the unseen, to wander through the shadowed corners of homes where ordinary walls conceal extraordinary terrors. These are the stories of families, couples, and individuals who believed they were settling into a safe, comfortable house, only to discover that their dream homes had hidden lives of their own. You may wish to adjust your blankets, dim the lights, and settle into a position where your imagination can roam freely, because what you're about to hear is true. Each story is drawn from real experiences, accounts painstakingly compiled, and the subtle details preserved to evoke not only the chills of fear, but also the lingering dread that accompanies long-term haunting. These are 7 haunted house stories that will whisper to you in the dark, creep into your thoughts as you drift towards sleep, and remain with you long after the final word has been spoken. Our first story takes us to a quiet street in a small town, where the Smith family thought they had found their forever home. The house itself was unassuming, a classic 2-story structure with a wide front porch and neatly kept garden. Its appearance was welcoming, the kind of home you imagine children playing on the lawn, neighbors exchanging polite greetings, and quiet evenings by the fireplace. When the Smiths first moved in, there was a brief period of adjustment, unpacking boxes, arranging furniture, and settling the children into their rooms. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary, and for a few weeks, life felt ordinary. But then, the subtle disturbances began. At first, it was merely sounds, a soft footstep above the ceilings, a drawer opening slightly when no one was near, the faint echo of voices in empty rooms. The Smiths were skeptical at first, rationalizing these incidents as the house settling or drafts causing odd noises. Yet, the frequency increased. Lights would flicker unpredictably, doors would slam shut without wind, and objects would move inexplicably. The children, initially excited to explore every corner of their new home, began to hesitate, glancing nervously at corners and avoiding certain rooms entirely. One evening, Mrs. Smith recounted the first truly unsettling event. She was preparing dinner when she noticed a shadow crossing the hallway. She froze, certain someone had entered the house. She called out, but no one responded. When her husband arrived, he too saw the shadow. And yet, when they turned on the lights and searched every room, there was nothing. Over the next weeks, similar incidents continued. A rocking chair would begin to move on its own. Inexplicable cold spots would appear in various rooms, and most unnervingly, the children began speaking to imaginary companions who they insisted were watching over us. Mr. Smith, a man of reason and calm logic, attempted to confront the phenomena. He set up cameras and audio recorders, convinced that if he could capture something tangible, he could explain it away. What he recorded, however, defied explanation. Shadows flitted across hallways when no one was present. Low, indecipherable whispers emanated from empty rooms. On several occasions, the footage caught objects lifting from surfaces and falling in a manner inconsistent with gravity. At this point, the Smiths could no longer deny that something unusual and perhaps malevolent was inhabiting their home. The turning point came one night when Mr. Smith awoke to the sound of a child crying. He followed the sound, assuming it was one of his own children, only to find their bedroom empty. The crying led him to the living room, where he saw a figure standing in the shadows, impossibly tall, its features indistinct, but its presence undeniably threatening. He tried to speak, to reach out, but his voice caught in his throat. The figure remained for several moments, then slowly dissipated, leaving a chilling silence in its wake. The children, woken by the noise, whispered that the figure had been visiting them as well, and described it as a man in the dark who watches while we sleep. The Smiths eventually sought outside help, consulting paranormal investigators and local historians. The house, they learned, had a long history, with records indicating several previous occupants had vacated abruptly. Some accounts mentioned unexplained illnesses, strange accidents, and, in one particularly tragic case, the disappearance of a young child decades prior. The investigators conducted a series of sessions using standard equipment: EVP recorders, thermometers, and cameras. They reported an overwhelming negative energy, with cold spots and unexplained sounds occurring even when the house was unoccupied. The Smiths, once eager homeowners, now lived in a state of constant vigilance, setting boundaries, performing cleansing rituals, and attempting to maintain a semblance of normal life. Our second story shifts to a more urban setting. An apartment in a historic building with ornate woodwork and tall ceilings. Unlike the isolated Smith residence, this apartment was part of a complex with many neighbors. Yet the tenant, a young woman named Eleanor, experienced something far more personal and intimate in her haunting. Eleanor had moved into the apartment after securing a position in the city and found the old building charming. High ceilings, creaking floors, and antique fixtures added character, or so she thought. Almost immediately, she noticed inexplicable occurrences: books falling from shelves, objects moving between rooms, and the sense of being watched, especially at night. Unlike in the Smith home, Eleanor's encounters were predominantly visual and tactile. She reported seeing reflections in mirrors that did not match her own movements, and sometimes shadows would linger in corners where light should reach. Eleanor's most unsettling experiences involved physical sensations. She often awoke feeling restrained, as though someone had been holding her down. Her bedroom would become inexplicably cold in the middle of summer. On more than one occasion, she would find scratches on her arms or bruises that could not be explained by normal activity. Her friends and family initially dismissed these experiences, attributing them to stress or overactive imagination. But as the incidents escalated, Eleanor grew fearful to the point of panic. She sought the advice of friends familiar with the paranormal and eventually hired a medium to evaluate the space. The medium reported the presence of a restless entity, one that was particularly fixated on Eleanor herself. The entity seemed to be a residual presence of a former occupant who had died tragically within the apartment. Eleanor was advised to perform cleansing rituals and to assert her own space energetically, creating boundaries that could be respected by the spirit. While some relief came from these efforts, Eleanor's experiences persisted intermittently, particularly during late hours when the apartment was empty and silent. She began keeping a journal to record these experiences, noting the times, locations, and sensations she encountered. Over months, patterns emerged, but no conventional explanation could account for the phenomena. Meanwhile, the building's management, though polite, remained largely skeptical. Other tenants reported minor disturbances, but nothing as intense as Eleanor's experiences. The apartment, in essence, became her own private haunted space. Eventually, she moved out, citing the inability to sleep and the constant unease as primary reasons. The apartment, left to a new tenant, retained its reputation as the spooky unit, though subsequent occupants reported only mild disturbances compared to Eleanor's experiences. At the same time, across the country, another family was encountering a different kind of haunting. In a rural farmhouse, the Johnson family had settled into a home that had been abandoned for decades. Unlike the Smiths or Eleanor, the Johnsons were prepared, at least in theory, for old houses to creak and for unexpected occurrences. Yet, nothing could have prepared them for the activity they experienced. The farmhouse was structurally sound, but isolation amplified the sensations of dread. Footsteps echoed through empty hallways. Doors opened and closed of their own accord, and objects would vanish only to reappear in entirely different locations. The Johnson children were particularly sensitive to these disturbances. They reported seeing figures at the edges of their vision, hearing voices whispering unintelligible words, and experiencing cold spots that seemed to follow them from room to room. Their parents, initially skeptical, documented these experiences meticulously, installing cameras and recording audio during the night. Footage captured objects levitating briefly before falling to the floor, shadows moving independently of light sources, and unexplained noises that defied mechanical explanation. As with previous stories, the family turned to local experts and historians. They discovered that the farmhouse had a tragic history, including several deaths under mysterious circumstances and repeated ownership changes, with occupants leaving abruptly. The Johnsons attempted various interventions: cleansing rituals, smudging, and protective symbols placed throughout the home. For a brief time, the activity would diminish, only to return with renewed intensity. Eventually, They reconcile themselves to living with an unpredictable presence, always cautious, always alert. They came to understand that some entities, whether residual or conscious, cannot be reasoned with, only respected or avoided. As night falls, consider your own surroundings. Are the walls merely walls, or do they hold echoes of the past? Are the creaks and groans of your home simply the settling of wood, or is there more watching, waiting, lingering in the shadows? Each house has its own story, a history woven with human emotion, joy, tragedy, and sometimes the inexplicable. The haunted house is not simply a trope of fiction. It is a space where memory, energy, and presence intersect in ways that defy conventional understanding. The fourth story in our journey through haunted houses takes us to an old Victorian home perched on the edge of a sleepy town. The Harrington family had purchased the property with dreams of restoring its former glory. To outsiders, the house appeared elegant, even charming, with its tall, narrow windows and ornate gable that reached toward the sky like fingers. Inside, the walls retained the scent of decades past, a mixture of polished wood, old wallpaper, and the faint lingering trace of the lives once lived there. The family, eager to move in and start their new chapter, was unaware of the house's long history of misfortune. From the very first night, the Harringtons sensed something was amiss. It began with small, almost trivial occurrences. Doors would not stay closed. Lights would flicker when no one was near the switch, and distant footsteps echoed in empty hallways. At first, the family tried to rationalize each incident. Children playing in the attic, electrical quirks, the house settling. These were explanations they clung to in order to maintain a sense of normalcy. But as days turned into weeks, the inexplicable events grew in both frequency and intensity. Shadows seemed to stretch unnaturally along walls, and objects would inexplicably move from one room to another. Mrs. Harrington was the first to experience a direct encounter. She recounted a night when she awoke to the sensation of being watched. As she turned toward the living room, a figure appeared momentarily in the corner of her eye. A tall, indistinct shape that vanished whenever she looked directly. Initially, she attributed it to a trick of the light or fatigue. Yet, as these visions persisted nightly, it became clear that something far beyond the ordinary inhabited their home. The children were not spared either. The youngest, only 7 at the time, claimed to see people who don't belong here wandering through the hallways. The eldest spoke of whispers calling her name in the dead of night. Voices neither soft nor kind. The parents, concerned but skeptical, attempted to intervene. They installed cameras throughout the house and recorded audio sessions, hoping to capture evidence to justify their concerns and perhaps to reassure themselves that their home was safe. What they captured was unsettling. Shadows darted across rooms with no logical source. Furniture subtly shifted positions between the recordings, and on several nights, Soft whispering echoed clearly from empty spaces. The most disturbing moments occurred in the attic, which the family initially thought was safe. Doors would slam unexpectedly, and objects would fall or levitate briefly before crashing to the floor. The energy in the room was palpable. Anyone entering could feel a cold, heavy presence pressing down, making movement feel laborious, breath shallow. Determined to understand the phenomenon, the Harringtons sought help from paranormal investigators. A team arrived, equipped with cameras, audio devices, and sensors to measure temperature fluctuations and electromagnetic fields. Their findings were consistent: cold spots, unexplained movement, and clear anomalies in sound recordings. Beyond the physical evidence, the investigators reported a sense of oppressive energy, one that intensified in the evenings and often seemed to center around the family's youngest child. It became evident that whatever presence resided in the house had taken a particular interest in the family. The family's experiences were not limited to sensory disturbances. Psychological impacts became evident as days turned into weeks. Anxiety grew. Sleep was often disrupted by nightmares in which the children would relive terrifying scenes in the house. The parents reported waking in cold sweats, feeling the weight of unseen eyes observing them even during the brightest parts of the day. Slowly, the home that was meant to be a sanctuary transformed into a landscape of tension and unease, where every creak or shadow carried potential menace. The fifth story introduces us to a more insidious form of haunting, one that affects the mind as much as it does the senses. A young couple, newly married, moved into an older suburban home, unaware of its previous tenant's tragic history. Their experience began subtly, with fleeting glimpses of movement and inexplicable sounds. Soft knocks at the windows, the creak of floors in empty rooms. Yet, what distinguished their case from typical hauntings was the presence of psychological manipulation. The couple began to notice that their own behaviors seemed influenced by the house. They would misplace objects, forget appointments, or feel inexplicably drawn to certain rooms without conscious reason. Over time, their perceptions of one another shifted. Minor disagreements escalated rapidly. Tempers flared without clear cause, and both reported a sense of unease that lingered in every room. Sleep was interrupted by vivid dreams, often replaying moments from the previous day, but distorted in grotesque and unsettling ways. Shadows and voices in these dreams mirrored the disturbances of their waking life, creating a seamless blend between reality and nightmare. They sought help from friends and family, but the experiences were often dismissed as stress, or anxiety related to new responsibilities. Increasingly desperate, the couple documented the occurrences, taking photographs and recording video and audio. Some nights, their cameras captured objects in motion, while audio recordings revealed whispering voices that could not be attributed to any known source. More alarmingly, these disturbances seemed to escalate in direct correlation to their stress levels. as though the house itself fed on tension and doubt. The couple's story serves as a chilling reminder that haunted homes do not simply frighten with visible apparitions. They can infiltrate the mind, amplifying fear and tension until every waking hour feels dominated by an unseen influence. Meanwhile, in another part of the country, a retired man named Harold had purchased a home in hopes of enjoying peaceful solitude in his later years. At first glance, the house was perfect. Quiet streets, ample yard, and a sturdy structure with a history dating back over a century. Harold's experiences began innocuously, with occasional noises and fleeting shadows. As months passed, however, he began to feel watched even during daylight hours. Objects shifted inexplicably, and rooms sometimes felt smaller or differently proportioned than he remembered. Harold's most unnerving experiences were auditory. The house often carried sounds that seemed to originate from within walls or beneath the floors, voices murmuring phrases in languages he did not recognize, footsteps pacing when no one was present, and occasional loud crashes from rooms he had already inspected. Though he attempted to rationalize these events, the accumulation of experiences eroded his sense of normalcy. He reached out to local historians, learning that the property had been owned by a series of families who experienced sudden tragedies or moved without explanation. This discovery provided no comfort, only context, and Harold eventually accepted that his quiet retreat had become a nexus for forces beyond comprehension. In a neighboring state, another family, the Reynolds, encountered a haunting that would redefine their understanding of safety and domesticity. The Reynolds purchased a 19th century farmhouse, enchanted by its rustic charm and pastoral location. Yet, from the first night, it became clear that the home had retained the emotional residue of past events. Initially, the disturbances were subtle. A chill in certain rooms, the feeling of being watched, and fleeting glimpses of shadow. Over time, these manifestations intensified, moving beyond mere presence into active interference with the family's daily life. Children's toys would move on their own, cabinets would swing open, and personal belongings were frequently displaced. At night, the family experienced unexplained noises, whispers, tapping, and occasionally laughter that echoed through empty corridors. The parents attempted traditional methods of cleansing, prayer, smudging with sage, and placement of protective talismans throughout the house. While these methods offered temporary relief, the activity would inevitably return, often with heightened intensity. They realized that the house did not respond to attempts at control, but seemed to act independently, asserting its presence according to rules unknown to the living. By this time, it was clear that the haunted house is not merely a setting. It is an active participant in the lives of its occupants. Fear is not only a reaction, but a mechanism through which the house communicates, establishes boundaries, and asserts influence. Each of the stories we have shared thus far illustrates a different facet of this phenomenon, from subtle shifts in energy and cold spots to psychological manipulation, from shadows and whispers to vivid, undeniable apparitions. These tales are united by a common thread: ordinary homes transformed by extraordinary forces, leaving residents to navigate a reality where unseen presences shape the fabric of daily life. The sixth story in our collection centers on a family who had relocated to a sprawling country estate, seeking the peace and privacy that only a home surrounded by acres of woods could provide. The house itself was impressive, a multi-level structure with large windows that offered expansive views of the surrounding land. To the untrained eye, the property was idyllic, a place to escape the chaos of modern life. Yet, as with all haunted houses, appearances can be deceiving. The family, consisting of two parents and three children, moved in with high hopes, unaware that the home had already been visited by countless presences over the decades. The first signs appeared subtly: doors that creaked open despite being firmly closed, cold drafts that seemed localized to particular corners of the house, and faint footsteps echoing through hallways when no one was near. Initially, these were dismissed as the quirks of an older home, but as days passed, the frequency and intensity of these events grew. The family began to sense that their every action was being observed, as though invisible eyes tracked their movements. Objects began to shift positions inexplicably, and on multiple occasions, the children awoke screaming from nightmares that mirrored the disturbances in the house. One evening, the mother, Mrs. Parker, was preparing dinner when she noticed a shadow crossing the hallway, distinct and unnervingly human in shape, yet without discernible features. She froze, certain someone had entered the home. Her husband, Mr. Parker, arrived moments later and saw the same shadow. But when the lights were turned on and the rooms inspected, there was no one there. Over the next few weeks, the manifestations escalated. Furniture would move without contact, unexplained noises would crescendo in the late hours of the night, and most disturbingly, the children began talking to entities they insisted were present, naming them and describing them in detail. Determined to understand the situation, the family set up cameras and audio recorders throughout the house. The footage revealed startling anomalies. Shadows darted across hallways independently of any light source. Objects levitated briefly before falling, and whispers were captured in the dead of night. The investigators who were later called in reported not only physical disturbances, but also an overwhelming oppressive energy that seemed to concentrate around the children's rooms. It became clear that the house itself was actively engaged with the family, influencing the atmosphere, the emotions, and the experiences of those living within its walls. The seventh story takes us to a historic townhouse in a bustling city, where an elderly couple sought a change of pace from their quiet suburban life. Unlike the sprawling estates or rural homes in our previous stories. This townhouse was tightly packed among similar buildings, with neighbors close enough to hear nearly every noise. Yet, the hauntings that occurred here were no less profound. The couple, Mr. and Mrs. Lawrence, reported unusual occurrences from the very first week of moving in. It began with faint noises, soft knocks on walls, subtle creaks of the floorboards, but soon escalated to full apparitions appearing in peripheral vision, disembodied voices, and objects moving inexplicably. What made the Lawrences' experiences unique was the intensity with which the entities interacted with them. The house seemed to respond to their emotions, amplifying fear during moments of vulnerability. For example, when Mrs. Lawrence was alone, reading in the parlor, she felt a sudden, freezing draft and saw the outline of a figure materialize near the doorway. The figure remained for several moments, motionless, before vanishing as if it had never existed. Mr. Lawrence described hearing whispered threats when he entered the kitchen late at night, followed by the clattering of utensils as if something unseen had been rummaging through the drawers. In each instance, the couple attempted to rationalize the occurrences. Old buildings settling, faulty wiring, or even stress from relocation. However, as incidents continued and grew in both frequency and intensity, the evidence of a supernatural presence became undeniable. The couple invited a medium to assess the townhouse, and she confirmed the existence of multiple entities, some residual and some seemingly conscious. The medium advised performing protective rituals and establishing spiritual boundaries, though she cautioned that complete resolution might not be possible. The Lawrence's story demonstrates that haunted houses are not limited by size or location. Even in densely populated urban areas, residual energies and conscious entities can establish a presence that is deeply felt by occupants. Returning now to the rural setting, our eighth story involves a couple who had purchased an 18th century farmhouse, drawn by its rustic charm and historical significance. From the first night, subtle disturbances suggested that the home was far from ordinary. The couple experienced cold drafts, doors opening and closing without cause, and fleeting shadows that seemed to move independently of natural light. As time went on, these manifestations escalated to include whispers, footsteps, and the sensation of being observed even when the house was empty. The couple documented their experiences meticulously, capturing photographs and audio recordings. On several occasions, objects were found in places where they had no logical explanation. Even more disconcerting were the feelings of pressure and unease that seemed to intensify in certain rooms, particularly those that had been sealed or unoccupied for long periods. Local historians confirmed that the property had witnessed multiple tragedies over the centuries, including sudden deaths, unexplained disappearances, and conflicts among former occupants. These historical events appeared to correlate with the areas of the house most active in paranormal manifestations. Across the country, in a historic suburban neighborhood, the ninth story involves a family moving into a mid-century home with the hope of starting fresh after a series of personal hardships. The house was well maintained, with manicured gardens and modern amenities. Yet despite its outward appearance, the family encountered a series of disturbances that gradually escalated over months. It began with minor incidents, unexplained noises, objects moving slightly, and the occasional flickering light, but eventually grew to include full apparitions, whispering voices, and the sensation of being watched at all times. The family noticed patterns in the activity, with certain rooms or times of day being more active than others. They attempted traditional methods of addressing the haunting, including spiritual cleansings and the placement of protective symbols throughout the house. While these measures provided temporary relief, the activity always returned, sometimes with increased intensity. The family came to understand that the house had its own rhythm, a pattern of activity independent of the family's actions, and that coexisting with the presence required vigilance, respect, and awareness of the subtle cues indicating the entity's presence. Meanwhile, another account comes from a townhouse in a historic district where a young woman named Sarah moved in to pursue a new job opportunity. The building itself was centuries old, with thick walls and creaking floorboards that carried sounds far further than one might expect. From her first nights in the apartment, Sarah experienced inexplicable disturbances. Lights flickered without cause, objects moved independently, and the sense of being observed was overwhelming. Her experiences were compounded by vivid, disturbing dreams in which the house itself seemed to interact with her subconscious. These dreams mirrored the physical disturbances in the home, creating a seamless, terrifying continuity between sleep and wakefulness. Our 10th story shifts to a rural manor with a long storied history. The Green family had purchased the property hoping to escape the bustle of city life, lured by the sprawling grounds and the antique charm of the manor. Initially, life seemed idyllic. The children explored the garden, and the parents enjoyed quiet evenings in the study. But soon, subtle disturbances began. Doors would open and close by themselves. Lights would flicker, and faint whispers could be heard in empty hallways. At first, the family assumed these were the quirks of an older house. But the frequency of these occurrences grew steadily, and a sense of unease settled over the household. One night, Mrs. Green awoke to the sensation of someone standing at the foot of her bed. She opened her eyes and saw a shadowy figure, indistinct but unmistakably human in form. Frozen with fear, she dared not move, and after a few moments, the figure vanished. Similar experiences occurred nightly, and soon the children began describing encounters with entities they named. The family installed cameras throughout the house, capturing shadows, objects moving independently, and occasional unexplained sounds. It became apparent that the manor itself was not merely old or eccentric. It had retained the energy of its past occupants in a way that manifested as ongoing paranormal activity. The 11th story takes us to a suburban home purchased by the Lewis family, a young couple seeking a fresh start. They were drawn to the home's charm and location, but soon realized that something unseen resided within its walls. Early disturbances included flickering lights, the faint sounds of footsteps, and objects subtly displaced. As weeks passed, the manifestations grew more pronounced. Shadowy figures would appear, doors would slam, and whispers could be heard in rooms that were empty. The couple, initially skeptical, set up cameras and audio recorders to document the occurrences. They captured footage showing objects moving without explanation and shadows flitting across rooms. The activity seemed particularly focused on the children's rooms. The Lewis children reported seeing figures at the edge of their vision and hearing voices calling their names at night. The parents sought help from paranormal experts who confirmed the presence of multiple entities within the home. They recommended rituals and measures to establish spiritual boundaries, though they cautioned that full resolution might not be possible. The family adjusted their daily routines, taking care to respect the boundaries of these entities while trying to maintain a sense of normalcy. In another tale, a couple moved into an older farmhouse in a rural setting. At first, the house appeared perfect, well maintained, with ample space and a sense of history that appealed to the couple. However, subtle disturbances quickly revealed the home's darker side. Cold spots, flickering lights, and the sensation of being watched were among the first signs. Over time, these phenomena escalated. Objects would move independently. Unexplained noises echoed through the empty rooms, and the couple experienced feelings of pressure and unease in particular areas of the house. The farmhouse's history added layers of complexity. Previous occupants had reported sudden illnesses, unexplained accidents, and frequent, abrupt moves. The couple documented every occurrence meticulously, recording audio and video, taking photographs, and noting times and locations of the disturbances. Despite their best efforts to rationalize or control the activity, the presence remained, an inescapable force that influenced both the physical space and the family's emotional well-being. Meanwhile, another story centers on a townhouse in a bustling city, where a young woman named Claire moved in to start her career. From the first week, she noticed unusual occurrences: flickering lights, objects moving independently, and a pervasive sense of being observed. These experiences were accompanied by vivid dreams in which shadows appeared to interact with her subconscious. The overlap between waking disturbances and nocturnal visions created a seamless, terrifying continuity. As her anxiety increased, So did the intensity of the manifestations, leaving Claire unable to distinguish between reality and the house's influence. Simultaneously, in a quiet rural town, the Thompson family had purchased an 18th century home. Initially, life seemed calm and peaceful, but they soon experienced the house's more overt disturbances. Shadows would shift unpredictably, whispers echoed through empty rooms, and objects moved inexplicably. One of the most unsettling aspects was the presence of cold spots that would appear in specific areas, intensifying the sense of unease. These cold spots were accompanied by subtle auditory phenomena, the faint creak of a floorboard, or the soft whisper of a voice in an empty hallway. The family sought guidance from local historians and paranormal experts, learning that the home had a history of tragic events and abrupt departures by former occupants. The 12th story is a tale of a young family moving into a suburban home with hopes of creating lasting memories. The house, built in the early 20th century, possessed the charm and character the parents desired. But soon, subtle disturbances began. Unexplained noises, objects moving independently, and fleeting shadows indicated the presence of an unseen entity. The children reported seeing figures at the edges of their vision, often describing them as shadowy or indistinct. The parents, initially dismissive, quickly realized that these were not products of imagination. They installed cameras, recorded audio, and began keeping detailed logs of each occurrence. One night, the mother awoke to the sound of soft footsteps in the hallway. She followed the sound, only to find the corridor empty. The experience left her unnerved, and similar events became increasingly frequent. The family consulted paranormal investigators who confirmed the presence of multiple entities within the home. The investigators reported not only physical manifestations, but also a palpable negative energy, particularly concentrated around the children's rooms. Despite the family's efforts to establish boundaries and perform cleansing rituals, the presence persisted, leaving them to navigate a reality where the house itself seemed to assert influence over their daily lives. In a neighboring state, a couple moved into a historic townhouse seeking a fresh start. The house, while charming, harbored an unseen presence. Early signs included flickering lights, unexplained sounds, and a pervasive sense of being observed. Over time, the activity intensified. Shadows appeared and vanished. Objects moved without explanation, and the couple experienced cold spots in multiple rooms. Attempts to rationalize the events proved futile. Paranormal experts confirmed the presence of multiple entities, advising protective measures and rituals. The couple adapted, learning to coexist with the persistent presence, understanding that the house's influence extended beyond physical disturbances into emotional and psychological realms. Finally, our 14th story focuses on a rural estate with a long, complex history. The residents, a family of four, initially enjoyed the property's charm and tranquility. Yet, subtle disturbances, objects moving independently, fleeting shadows, whispers, and cold spots quickly revealed the house's supernatural dimension. The family documented the occurrences meticulously, capturing audio, video, and photographs, and noted patterns in the activity. Experts confirmed the presence of residual energy and active entities. The family's adaptation involved respect, vigilance, and acknowledgement of the house's history, ultimately learning that living alongside such presences requires both caution and awareness. Even as we conclude these stories, remember that haunted houses are not simply places of terror. They are living records of the emotions, tragedies, and energies of those who came before. Some presences linger quietly, merely observing. Others interact, influence, and even manipulate the lives of those who inhabit the space. Whether in sprawling estates, historic townhouses, or suburban homes, the common thread remains. Ordinary walls and familiar rooms conceal experiences that defy explanation. As you lie in bed tonight, consider the spaces around you. The creak of a floorboard, the flicker of a shadow, or a sudden chill may not be coincidence. Listen closely, watch carefully, and respect the unseen. These 7 true haunted house stories remind us that the world is filled with mysteries, that fear is as real as the presence that provokes it, and that sometimes the houses we call home may not be ours alone. Sleep carefully, for the night has its own stories.